David Suzuki has a strange relationship with children. This past week, he set up a website designed to scare kids into thinking that Santa Claus is in danger because of man-made global warming, and that the best way to solve that problem was to give Suzuki himself money. Seriously, what you're looking at on the screen right now isn't something we designed. That's his scaremongering website designed to make kids afraid that if they don't give Suzuki money, Santa gets it. What a creep. But Suzuki has always found it easier to manipulate kids than to convince adults, because adults has questions about things, unscripted questions like, hey, David Suzuki, how come you take millions of dollars in donations from some of the biggest companies out there and then don't criticize those same companies, like the $1 million gift from Power Corp, which does enormous business in China? Is that why Suzuki gives China, the world's largest polluter, the world's largest carbon emitter, a free pass? I mean, here's David Suzuki last month during his propaganda hour in 200 Canadian schools teaching children that China really isn't a serious carbon emitter or polluter. Look at this.
China is becoming one of the world's leaders in building and exporting windmills. China is committed to developing a green economy.
Got it. So China is doing just great. Got nothing to do with that $1 million donation, eh? See, an adult might ask if Suzuki's funding from Chinese companies has anything to do with that. An adult might ask how Suzuki spends money from his own so-called charity on things that aren't so charitable. Here's a look at his charitable registration from Revenue Canada's website. He raked in more than $10.5 million last year. Not bad for an anti-capitalist, but look at what he spends that money on. Not on charitable works, on perks and payments for himself and his friends. Check this out. $4 million for salaries, another $1 million for consultants, $500,000 for rent and office supplies, more than $200,000 for travel, $100,000 in advertising to tell us just how awesome he is. 3/4 of his charitable money is burned up on self-serving things like that before they even make a single charitable grant. An adult might ask why Suzuki has literally 16 registered lobbyists on his payroll. What does lobbying have to do with being a scientist or a charity? You know, these are adult questions. But Suzuki prefers to talk to kids. Now, I'll let him explain why in his own words.
We need to educate children, and we need those educated children to influence their parents. Now, of course, we have been since 1990.
Suzuki prefers to indoctrinate kids and then have them to go home and press their parents to follow Suzuki's will. That's the model for his give me money or Santa gets it campaign. Now, the last two video clips I've shown you were from the David Suzuki propaganda hour that was beamed into 200 school classrooms across Canada without parental consent. Question, what other lobbyist would be able to have an hour of your children's time unfiltered, without parental guidance, right in our public schools? What other hucksters would be allowed? And the cherry on top of all this was that you paid for it. You already paid for David Suzuki many ways. You've paid for his whole career at the CBC, decades of propaganda dished up week after week after week through our state broadcaster. You pay for his charitable foundation because he actually gets to issue tax receipts for donations to his lobby firm. That's a nice touch. And you paid for this propaganda hour in schools through a federal agency called the National Film Board. I mean, seriously, in the age of the internet, in the age of YouTube and Netflix and hundreds of channels on your TV, the government still spends your money each year on something called a National Film Board. I mean, it's funny if it weren't our money. And so they spend their money getting Suzuki into your children's schools. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds. It costs a lot of money. For example, Suzuki and the Film Board hired someone using your money to send out emails before the event. And they billed $3,600 to send out emails? Guys, emails are free, and David Suzuki already has a computer. $3,600? Oh, and he hired a publicist too. Now, the Film Board already has a publicist, and so does David Suzuki, but they hired a special PR flack just for this school propaganda event. But Suzuki didn't really need a propagandist to talk to the big world out there. He needed a propagandist to deal with those students who might be impertinent enough to ask him tough questions, the great man himself. Seriously, look at paragraph 4H of Suzuki's contract. The National Film Board had to collect all questions for Suzuki in advance. No spontaneous, unscripted questions, even from the children. Now, each of the kids at the 200 schools had already been forced to watch Suzuki's self-serving film about himself, humbly called Force of Nature. But what if some precocious child didn't buy the BS? Well, not to worry, our tax dollars went to hire someone to literally write a script. I've got a copy of the script in my hands here. Hilariously, even though the questions were screened in advance, the government bureaucrat who was emceeing the event says they were, quote, really tough questions. No, they weren't. They were screened by Suzuki. That's Suzuki's idea of a debate. He chooses the questions, and the government goes along with it. Here's an example of a tough one, and I'm taking this right from the government-written, Suzuki-approved script. Who will continue your work? Who is the next David Suzuki that we can trust? That is one of the scripted, tough questions of David Suzuki. That's the obvious premise. Of course, we can trust David Suzuki. We can trust no one else but Suzuki. I mean, we actually do trust him, I guess, if we let him in our schools, right? We trust him with our kids, right? So, of course, we all trust him. But just to be sure, we script that question in to reinforce any dissenting children that would dare think otherwise. Here's what's even funnier. Although Suzuki's own answers weren't pre-scripted, the National Film Board's response to them was scripted. I mean, seriously, I have it here. No matter what Suzuki said, the film board was going to say, great response. Sorry, this is not learning. This is not teaching. This is not science. This is propaganda. David Suzuki's bad enough, but the National Film Board paid for this crap. Let me tell you the truth that you won't hear about in any scripted child propaganda session at a government school or in any government propaganda outlet like the CBC or the Government Film Board. David Suzuki is a multi-millionaire. He's a jet setter. He claims he hates capitalism and corporations, but he grosses $10 million a year for his corporation, much of it from big industry and banks. He's thin-skinned. He hates debating. He needs to be scripted and well paid. He's David Suzuki Incorporated. His contract goes on for pages and pages about how all of the schools who have the privilege of watching his movie had damn well better pay him for it. Oh, and he hates us at the Sun when we dared to ask questions about how the Government Film Board was spending our money on this junk. There was a major freakout over there. I mean, here's an email for you from Christine Collins of the National Film Board, furious with the fact that we at Sun Media dared to ask questions about this propaganda hour. Here she is sending a furious email to another bureaucrat. And you can see, unlike the children, we did not submit our questions to Suzuki in advance for his approval. Here's what Christine says. She says, quote, "This is a result of letting Sun Media record the entire event." She says, "I am really not thrilled that this was permitted to happen." This is what she says. She said it was, quote, "amateur hour and disappointing." And then she said this, quote, "I realize we can't control the press, but we can set boundaries." What a petty little censor. Of course Christine Collins works for the Government Film Board because someone in a private film company would love freedom of the press and think it would be interesting to have unscripted questions. But when you work for the government, you learn to hate dissent. You learn to love control. Christine Collins of the National Film Boards hated the fact that we weren't following her obsequious script. She regretted the fact that she can't control us. Prediction: this little tyrant is in for a promotion at the Government Film Board, or maybe at David Suzuki's mega corporation itself. See, Suzuki hates dissent too. He once said that people who don't agree with his theory of man-made global warming should go to jail. That's what he thinks of free inquiry. That's what he thinks of dissent. That's what he thinks of debate. That's the kind of man we allowed piped in to 1 to 200 schools. Let me close with my favorite David Suzuki clip of all time. This is David Suzuki showing what he thinks of science and man and nature. This is before he had publicists and censors and image consultants. This is David Suzuki in the raw.
Yeah, I mean, most people in the world are content to stay as first or second level maggots. And they establish their own little area and they crawl around there, and that's fine. And the guys that become 10th level maggots are really big wheels.
Did you get that? We humans are maggots. But now he's a big wheel, a 10th level maggot himself. He's the one with 3 homes. He's the one with a multi-million-dollar corporation, an army of lobbyists, rich donors, and a jet-set lifestyle. He's the big maggot now, to quote him. Look, I don't mind David Suzuki being rich. I don't even mind him having unscientific views about things like people being maggots. But keep it out of our schools. Keep it away from the kids. What do you think? Do you think the government film board should pay money to pipe this nut into 200 schools without parental guidance? Now, don't tell me. Tell the man who gives Suzuki charitable status and who keeps a 20th century government film board around in the 21st century. I'm talking about Stephen Harper. Send Stephen Harper a letter by email right now. Tell him you don't like your tax dollars going to put that whack job in our schools. Email him at pm@pm.gc.ca. Tell Stephen Harper, tell our Prime Minister that true conservatives don't believe in left-wing propaganda. And a truly conservative government wouldn't sponsor this crap and have a government-funded bureaucrat trying to censor the Sun, the last best hope for independent journalism in Canada.